Sam, if you don't mind, you could also join us. Yeah. Thank you. So yes, please come in. So I'd like to welcome you all to this launch of our newest report. My name is Gladwell Otieno. I'm the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Open Governance, AfriCOG for short. And today we're going to be launching our new report called Wrong Direction, Corruption in Kenya 2022 to 2024. I'm very happy to have with us the author of the report, Mwalimu Mati, and we're also joined by our friend and colleague and partner, Samuel Maura, who is the CEO of the Private Sector Development Trust. And in the course of the morning, we'll be joined by different people who have other engagements. As you know, December is a very busy month. So for those of you who don't know AfriCOG, we are an independent nonprofit organization that provides research and monitoring on anti-corruption, governance, and public ethics issues in both the public and private sectors. We do this so as to address the structural causes of the crisis of governance in Kenya and the region. We're not interested in just the sort of momentary flare-ups of corruption, although those are expressions of the structural issues. But we like to focus on why things are going wrong. So the overall objectives of our program are to promote the implementation of the Constitution, to strengthen anti-corruption and good governance in Kenya and the region with objective, high-quality research and advocacy, and above all, to build the capacity of citizens to be permanently vigilant, demand accountability, and monitor progress on governance issues. And we do think that the basis of good governance is an alert and vigilant public who are knowledgeable and monitor the government. So our reports and our advocacy go towards building the capacity to do that. And we hope to add value to anti-corruption and governance reform processes by stimulating policy discussion and supporting evidence-based advocacy and the mobilization of our partners. We believe in basing ourselves on good quality, objective research in order to inform our activities and those of our partners and those of policymakers. Now, our latest report documents and assesses corruption in the first 2 years of the government of President William Ruto. It's a relatively short time, 2 years, but we found in the course of developing the report that we were overwhelmed by the multitude of issues with which we were confronted and which we were trying to make sense of. And we also cover the waning days of the Uhuru Kenyatta Jubilee administration in this report. So it's the end of Kenyatta regime to the beginning of the Ruto regime, the first 2 years. And it's the latest in a series of reports which have examined the growth and nature of corruption in Kenya over the decades. We've traced the evolution of corruption in Kenya over the decades and seen it embedding itself, becoming much more entrenched and much more endemic, to the point where we feel we can speak of a phenomenon called state capture. We're launching this report to mark the International Anti-Corruption Day, which is held to observe the passage of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. December 9th is International Anti-Corruption Day, and it's noteworthy that the theme of this year's International Anti-Corruption Day is Uniting with Youth Against Corruption, shaping tomorrow's integrity. This comes in the same year as the Gen Z uprising in Kenya, which was unprecedented in its countrywide mobilization and political impact. It was triggered by massive planned tax hikes and rage at the broken promises and excesses of profligate, corrupt politicians. The Gen Z movement uses social media to deploy their message and demand accountability and integrity by their leaders. But they did not limit themselves to social media. They moved out onto the street and staged unprecedented mass campaigns around this country, as we all know. The government resorted to co-optation, killings, torture, and abductions to try to quell the movement, but has lacked the strategy and skills to handle this crisis, which will persist, and we see it persisting as we follow daily events. Courageous young activists and whistleblowers have been victimized and persecuted. For example, in the report, we'll hear about the young whistleblower Nelson Amenya, who is based abroad and has been subject to retaliatory litigation and threats to his safety. So it is on this day, in keeping with the focus of this year's International Anti-Corruption Day, that we honor the memories of the young people who lost their lives in the struggle for a better Kenya. We honor those who lost their freedom, those who have been abducted, those who have been disappeared. We note that no one has as yet been held accountable for the abduction and disappearances and killings of scores of young people. This is a stain on the national conscience. Now, in terms of our body of work, our earlier report on state capture, which looked at the fact that Kenya had been so quote-unquote fighting corruption for decades, we published a State of the Nation report explaining why the then President Uhuru Kenyatta's anti-corruption efforts would be unlikely to work. The study diagnosed the problem as state capture, or the repurposing of state institutions for private profiteering. We traced the evolution of Kenya as an institutionalized kleptocracy. That is, a system of state capture in which ruling networks and commercial partners hijack governing institutions and maintain impunity for the purpose of raiding the budget to sustain themselves in power and for the security of the regime. We concluded at that time that Kenyatta's publicity-driven prosecutions would likely deepen rather than undermine corruption, as indictments and prosecutions would get weaponized to partisan ends for the 2022 elections. And this is a prediction which came true, and it's been borne out by subsequent events, even under this regime, with the continued partisan politicized use of prosecution. We followed this with a report on highway robbery, which looked at the issue of budgeted corruption. In the words of the last Auditor General, Edward Ouko, he felt that in his investigations of misappropriation and misuse of public funds, that there was a deliberate, funds were deliberately being inserted into the budget which were meant for no other purpose than to be stolen. Normally, when you think of corruption, you think of corruption at the stage of execution of budgets, when projects are being implemented. He talked of a particularly pernicious type of corruption in which money is put into the budget for no other purpose than to be extracted for corrupt ends. And he likened this process, he likened the budget to Thika Highway with exits and the exits are where the budgeted corrupt little funds would be, taken out. And so we looked at work in various infrastructure sectors, and came to the conclusion that indeed we could argue that there was such a thing as budgeted corruption, and that the entire elaborate structure of public financial management which had been set up by the new constitution had been subverted. And in our most recent report, we continued our examination of the ravenous appetite for debt, which we'd started in the highway robbery report. And last week we launched a report on Kenya's debt treadmill, the China portfolio, which covered China's debt relationships and Kenya's external debt with China from 2000 to 2024. We also focused generally on the issue of external debt in this report. And we looked at the unsustainable foreign debt, which was started under Kenyatta government's policy of deficit financing, which means using money you don't have for consumption, for consumptive purposes instead of investment. The Ruto administration has continued the Kenyatta regime's debt addiction with the same irresponsibility and disregard for transparency and accountability in the acquisition of debt, which now consumes a major part of our revenues without stimulating investment. We are merely borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. And in our latest report, The Wrong Direction, we trace the unfolding continuities and proliferation of corruption in Kenya under the Ruto government. We've already talked about the continuation of the weaponization of prosecution, the continuation of acquisition of debt now as a source of corrupt enrichment. So we trace the similarities and increase of corruption under the Ruto government, which echoes many of our earlier findings. Despite momentary positive developments and heartening displays of individual courage and integrity, this is by individual officers, individual judges, etc., corruption continues to deepen, scandals multiply, profligate wastage continues, institutional decline persists, and checks and balances are eroded. We entitled the report Wrong Direction because the view of an overwhelming majority of Kenyans is that this country is headed in the wrong direction, and that the president is the one who is most responsible for this. The feeling is expressed that he does not listen. His autocratic tendencies are in full display, and he presides over a system of impunity and the evisceration of the Constitution. The politics of patronage continues apace as the president seeks to consolidate his support base. We talked about the massive challenge to the system by Gen Z, which provoked the president to adopt a tactic which we've become very familiar with. Under Kenyatta, it was known as the handshake. I believe now they're calling it a broad-based government. Previously, it was a government of national unity. So the president seeks to consolidate his support base, rewarding his supporters and inviting his erstwhile opponents into government, a gambit that has become standard in Kenyan politics, which further drives corruption and impunity. Obviously, if you've got more mouths feeding at the trough, then you're going to drive up corruption. And the implicit bargain is that you will not be punished for this. You will be able to do it with impunity, which of course which drives up the atmosphere of lawlessness. At the same time, though, the government's room for maneuver is shrinking in a context of debt distress and the growing demographic pressures exemplified by the Gen Z uprising. In this report, we focus on events at the national level. This doesn't mean that we don't think there is corruption at the county level, but you'll see when you get the report that it's quite a long report, and if we'd included the counties, I think it would have had to be twice as long. So we intend to examine corruption at the county level in future reports. So through our reports, we hope to document events, stimulate and inform public debate, and strengthen the capacity of our allies to exercise civic vigilance, sometimes in an atmosphere of impunity when there is very little that can be done. What you can do is to document things and preserve evidence for the future. We hope that obviously that this sort of pessimistic prognosis will not be borne out by the facts, and we've seen in other countries how quickly regimes can collapse. Regimes which look relatively stable can collapse very rapidly, and this one does not look very stable. So I welcome you again today, and I would like to welcome Mwalimu Mati to present the report. Mr. Mati is a lawyer and governance expert with a long history in civil society. Among other institutions, he's worked with the Public Law Institute, Transparency International Kenya, where we were colleagues, and he was a founder of the influential Mars Group Kenya. Mwalimu, welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is International Anti-Corruption Day, which was first, I suppose, celebrated in 2003. Now, at that time, that was the day that they opened the United Nations Convention Against Corruption for signature and ratification. And the very first country to sign and ratify on the same day was Kenya. I remember the Honorable Kiraitu Murungi was the Minister of Justice, and at that time he was with our colleague John Githongo in Merida, Mexico. And Kenya was the first to sign up to the UN Convention Against Corruption. So 21 years later, we seem to have lost some of that desire and that sense of urgency. But haidhuru, the struggle will go on. Eric, this is going to fall down. Okay. So thank you very much for coming. This report has been quite a labor, quite intensive labor. But I also thank Gladwell for asking me to participate in this research and publication exercise. So the title of the report is Wrong Direction. This is not just my view or the view of AfriCOG, but if you look at public opinion polling, you will see that when President Ruto took office, he probably had a approval rating. I think these mics are beginning to create feedback. Thank you. Sorry. Let me begin again. You can see that over time there's been a collapse in the approval rating of President Ruto. As you'll see in the report and in my presentation, his overall support in Kenya was not as high as perhaps he had imagined. And to that extent, I think this report goes out to him to consider that perhaps he did take a wrong turn, which has left us now in this state of a wrong direction. So let us start the report. Tijan. We say that corruption is still rising. Kenya has tried all the prescribed anti-corruption reforms. We've changed our laws. We've created new anti-corruption institutions, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, for example. We've actually even changed our constitution. But the scale of corruption is actually increasing rather than decreasing. So we find that 19 years ago, actually in this very same hall, the National Commission on Human Rights published a report called Living Large. And that was within the first 18 months of the Kibaki administration. And at that time, it was headline news that the NARC government had spent 900 million shillings on buying new cars. These new cars were bought for the ministers and the highest officials. But how many cars were they? And why was this national news? I mean, today, we would not think that 900 million shillings is a lot of money, because nowadays we're talking in 900 billion shilling scandals. But at that time, the Kibaki government had bought 57 Mercedes-Benzes, some Land Cruisers, Mitsubishi Pajeros, Range Rovers, Nissan Terranos, Nissan Patrols, cars that today you'd probably not find on the government purchase list, because they've moved up to Range Rovers, Bentleys. You know what I mean? So we're talking about an irony that despite all this effort and all the money that we've put into fighting corruption, corruption is actually increasing in Kenya. Let's look at the scale of the issue. We're talking about a situation where the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, famously said that we lose 2 billion shillings a year, 2 billion shillings a day is stolen from government. Now, he wasn't just making that up. The Auditor General's reports show that 20% of government expenditure is actually being stolen or being misapplied, being misappropriated, being paid to the wrong people, being paid for no services rendered at all. Now, 20% of government spending in Kenya shillings terms is 800 billion shillings. 2 billion a day, multiplied by that 365 days in every year. Now, 800 billion shillings, this 20% that's going out, that is the one that's been stolen. Then in our government books, the Auditor General says there is 1.6 trillion. That's a third of the national budget, which is not properly accounted for. Corruption has devolved from the center to the counties. All of us are now familiar with the reports of the Controller of Budget on county expenditure and the scale at which money is being lost. And the net result of all this looting and waste and pilferage is that today, according to Oxfam, 8,000 Kenyans own more than the other 99.5% of the population. In other words, 8,000 Kenyans own more than over 51 million people. That's a highly unequal and a highly dangerous society to live in. It explains the increase in crime. It explains the desperation in which Kenyans are living, and it also explains why we can't as a government, and because we the people are the government, provide the basic socioeconomic services that are required under Article 43 of our Constitution. We add on another layer of problems. Because our government doesn't generate enough revenue to finance its ever-expanding budget, because our budget has gone from a Kibaki-era budget of about 700 billion shillings a year to, I think we're now at 4 trillion. Now, this 4 trillion is not, we're not capable of raising that money internally, so we borrow. We borrow domestically and we borrow internationally. Kenyan public debt, foreign and local loans to government, has now hit over 10 trillion shillings. That's more than twice the national annual budget. In each year, therefore, we have to repay interest on these loans, and we have to also pay the principal when it comes due. Now, in 2024, last year we paid over half a trillion, 500 billion shillings out of our revenue just to service interest. So if between now and 2027 we maintain that same rate of interest payments, we're going to pay over 1.5 trillion shillings. Now, 1.5 trillion shillings is multiple times. It's about 5 times the amount of money that is sent to the counties in each year. If you were to apply it to affecting or improving the health and education and general livelihood of the population, a lot could be done. But because we have a government that makes the wrong choices, this deficit spending, and worse, because we have dishonest government, so that even when you are able to obtain foreign and domestic support, money is going missing, we are trapped in this cycle of borrowing to repay, from Peter to repay Paul. In this administration, there has been a lot of borrowing. Initially, it was said it was borrowing because redemptions for obligations that had been undertaken by the Kenyatta government, for example, had fallen due, and that is true. But the Controller of Budget does say, and this is documented in her reports and in ours, that in this past year alone, Kenya has taken out 36 new foreign loans, amounting to just under 900 billion shillings. Almost all of that is commercial. Now, remember we had started out with that figure of 900 million shillings, agitating the public, making them feel that something's got to be done about this monster called corruption. Now we're talking about 900 billion. Gladwell has said it, I have said it, and you, the people, have said it, that 53% of the people polled in 2023 would have said the country is heading in the wrong direction. By September this year, that figure had gone up to 73%. Only 11% in September believed that the country was headed in the right direction. Now that's down from 30% at the beginning of the Ruto administration. Now that 30% is interesting, and actually it is kind of key, because if you think about it, during the 2022 election, the president was elected with 7.1 million against 6.9 million of Raila Odinga. But both of them, actually, if none of the above had been a candidate, they would have come second and third respectively. The stayaways, the number of people who did not bother to vote, that is, people who did not feel at all motivated to vote for either of those two candidates, was 7.9 million. Ruto would have lost that election by 600,000 votes to none of the above. Now this disengagement from that critical constitutional function, the right to vote, is a cause for worry, but also perhaps it also explains perhaps where the Gen Z, for example, emerges from. Because one of the things that people have always said until recently is that the youth of Kenya are not politically interested. I suppose we will see in 2027 a change in that turnout. But why are people not interested? It's because of, Tijan, poor track records, such as what we have seen over the last 36 months. If you look at that slide, the poor track record, If you look at that slide, and that's just a sketch, nobody has the time to actually document each and every absurd procurement fraud, procurement deal, theft. I've left off that list, for example, the disappearance of 20 metric tons of sugar disappears and then enters the market. And all this with impunity. It's because of this constant barrage of bad news that some people start to feel despondent. But we're here to urge you. This country can be governed better. Now, this country requires citizens to actually object to this kind of track record. To say that this is so far below the par or the standard of leadership that people should not be in office if they preside over these kind of things. Kenyans are not even bothering to report corruption. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission has an annual budget of 5.5 billion shillings, but it only manages to deliver about 60 cases to court per year. Now, if you divide that 5.5 billion by the 60 files that end up as prosecution files, then we're talking about an investment of in excess of 70 million shillings for each one of those prosecutions, a majority of which do not result in conviction. The EAC reports to the EACC are declining year on year. We're now talking about only 5,000 complaints being made to them, when 5 years ago they used to receive 10,000 complaints a year. Almost a 50% drop. Now, what does that tell you? I mean, it does tell you something. It tells you that people have lost faith in that institution. It's similar to, if you go to the annual National Bureau of Statistics, the overall report, the statistical abstract, I've not referenced it, but if you go there, and you will find a table which is called Crimes Reported to the Police. Now, the irony of ironies is that the police receive scores, that's something like 20 to 30 complaints of corruption a year. So Kenyans will not report to the EACC and will not report to the police either. Because what's the point? We're talking about a situation where people have understood that state institutions that they fund from their taxes are of no real value to them. It's a waste of time. So I think we need to start holding the EACC to greater account. Ditto, the Director of Public Prosecutions. Because at the end of the day, even if the EACC delivers those 60 cases, they have to be prosecuted by somebody, and that would be the DPP. But in Kenya, corruption is fairly high reward, low risk as an enterprise. Because even if you are convicted, which is highly unlikely, even after conviction, you're most likely to secure bail pending appeal. So you don't need to serve a sentence in Kenya if you're convicted of corruption. The higher up you are in terms of political and social connections, the more likely you will not serve a sentence. The more likely an appeal would be expedited. This is where you see the famous case of John Waluke, the MP for, I think, is it Sirisia? In and out from, how many years was he given? Is it 600 years? I can't remember, but it was a very drastic sentence. I think he was entitled to appeal. But his appeal has been concluded and he has been released and he's back in Parliament. He never spent more than a fortnight behind bars. For a fairly open and shut case. Of course, this might be libelous, and I think I should say no more about that issue. But if you're politically connected, you can even get a presidential pardon. And here you have the case of the late Dr. Davy Koech. Why is this? What is this relationship between political and social connections? And Gladwell, I think, will get into the whole idea of state capture. It's that basically Kenya is structured as a patron and support, or patron and client governance structure. And this has been from the time of the colonialists, where they invented chiefs for communities that didn't have them, and created a client base that they could do business with in colonizing a country. They signed treaties with people who didn't have authority, but once it's on paper, it's almost like a sovereign obligation, and acquired Kenya. Post-independent Kenya is much the same, and all our presidents have played this game. But a patron cannot remain a patron forever unless he rewards his supporters. And not only must he reward his supporters, he must protect them from when they have violated the law. So it's important to ask the question, if you're going to try and analyze the Kenya Kwanza government, for example, what was their support base? A lot of the press has always said that the real support base of Kenya Kwanza was disillusioned youth and rural voters who wanted to punch the dynasties in the nose. And that may be true. But I would say that without money to fight that campaign, because remember it was an insurgent campaign, KK was a brand new, the UDA was a brand new political party, it was in conflict with the state. We're talking about the deep state frustrating its movements. Where did it get the money to fight the state and win? So the real support base of William Ruto are his financiers. And this would explain why some of his policies, in fact many of his policies, are now seen by the people who voted for him as being almost raids on their pockets. Funders and financiers expect reward. Voters tend to be more passive. They expect you to do your job. But the funder, the moment you put down the Bible, the funder is in with you in that room. Now, at that point you will then ask, what are the characteristics of this particular president's funders, and are they any different from the funders of previous presidents? And I think Gladwell and AfriCOG have done a very good job of analyzing state capture. So in South Africa, it was an Indian family called the Guptas. In Jomo Kenyatta and Daniel Moi's time, it was something called Tiny Rowland and the Lonro Group, London Rhodesia mining group, which today, by the way, has as its chairman Cyril Ramaphosa. Under Moi, you also had people like Kamlesh Patni appearing, Ketan Somaya, you had the Golden Bird scam. Under Kibaki, you had the Anglo-leasing financiers. All these people had contributed in some way to the political campaigns that had put the governments in power. So if we ask the question of who funded Kenya Kwanza, you'll find that it tends to be contractors. Now these are not just tenderpreneurs, these are just government contractors. They don't own factories per se, but they supply government, so they're importers. Now, people like those, because they don't necessarily have any fixed assets in Kenya that they can't move, will also tend to care less about Kenya than somebody who actually has a manufacturing plant or is a big employer. In sum, people like those do not care where the money to pay them comes from. If it's stolen, they won't have a problem with it. They don't fear anti-corruption drives because they know that they are insulated from them. And ultimately, the patron is giving them assurances of protection. Laws can even be changed to give them business advantages. In the report, we reference amendments to the Finance Act in 2023, which created a near monopoly for a key funder of the president in the steel and cement industries. Inside tracks are created so that people will know about government policy before Parliament. So, for example, it's quite clear that the Adanis knew about the new aviation policy before Parliament had even approved that policy. So they put in the PIP document way before the policy had even been approved by Cabinet, but it corresponds in all material aspects to what was stated in the aviation policy, except that they did not have a competition to identify this particular private player. Everything else that they proposed, the 30-year leases, is in the aviation policy. It's even in the advice of the consultants to the Kenya Airports Authority. Without public participation, without parliamentary approval, all these things happen. That is capture of your legislature, capture of your policy by the patrons' key supporters, who I would say are the money men. Now, I don't think I'll go into the detail on the PPP technique, but suffice to say, it is authorized by law, but it is being applied in a partial manner. The design of most of the deals emphasize supposed public gain, but they mask public risks and the costs. And there has been an unnerving tendency, because the PPP would be ideal if the investors were Kenyan. But we have this always looking for an external partner tends to mean that ultimately we're exporting the money that we pay to the jurisdiction or the country from which these companies come from. And finally, there's this unusual but explainable tendency towards secrecy and an outright contempt for public engagement and participation. But all of that, ultimately, is to defeat the purpose of our public procurement laws, which require competition, open competition for government tenders and jobs. Now, the report also has a section which details why the Adani deal did not add up for Kenyans, so that we can lay to rest this canard, this lie, that only people who've never been to the airport would oppose this brilliant deal. Now, I think I had said this earlier, but this slide basically references another phenomenon which has resulted in massive pending bills across government. But these are basically, let me correct myself. In the past, it used to be the cause of pending bills. Today, pending bills, where, for example, you've supplied something to a county government and you didn't get paid, so you're put on the book of creditors, is because of inefficiency, or because somebody has actually stolen the money that was supposed to be used to pay you. But in the past, there was a very familiar scam which was perpetrated by construction companies. They're given a contract to do a road. There was one very famous one between Othaya and Nyeri, and you stay on site for a decade, claiming that you've not received some payment, and then you sue the government for the 10 years that your equipment has been lying there, and the government puts in a no contest plea, and then you're paid hundreds of billions of shillings. We have clauses in all these new PPPs that we're talking about, whether it's the Adani Ketraco, which was actually signed, or the Anglo leasing, which basically allow these people to sue us abroad for their purported losses when we cancel their contracts after finding out that they were the proceeds of corruption. So we now have these cowboy contractors. They ride into town, sign a deal with our people issue them with some sort of sovereign guarantee or sovereign letters of comfort. They go and borrow money. They then turn around and sue us when we cancel the contract because it violated our law. There's a similar situation that's going on. I believe it was something to do with some lady, a Kenyan lady who lives in the United States or in Canada, had been promised a contract to create software to spy on Kenyans. This sounded so bizarre. And she had been promised it, and on the verbal promise by a high-ranking State House official, she says, she then went and hired an American company to create this spyware. And then her contact told her, oh, we've decided against that. So what does she do? She flies into Kenya and files a lawsuit saying that she had been hired, there's no written contract, to do something which is unlawful, and she's in court, and she's suing, and I think she wants 1 billion shillings. And you've got to wonder, when we're entertaining such illegal contracts, even at the point of filing a plaint, but I don't practice law, so probably what I'm saying is actually wrong. But surely there must be some standard before you accept lawsuits against the government. Because that lawsuit is against the government. That is against you and me. It's not against the official or liability will not fall on that official. It will fall on the taxpayers. But reward must be given. That's, I think, what we're saying. It is seen, for example, in the jobs for the boys and girls. This is why there's the insistence, despite multiple court rulings, that we must appoint chief administrative secretaries, 50 of them, when you have 24 ministries. This is because of obligations that are undertaken in the context of political financing, which perhaps President Ruto is actually being a kind of an honest person here. He doesn't want to break these promises. But it's this kind of expenditure that's causing him to be unable to fulfill the campaign promises that he made to the people who really matter, the voters. I think we've described the legitimacy crisis, but the Gen Z uprising is something to be observed, and observed fairly critically. It's not gone away. The complaints that they were making have not been addressed, but the political class, despite the fact that the uprising demonstrated how fragile their hold on power can be, seem to have gotten into this comfort zone again. Now, we dropped the hustlers at the first opportunity in preference to political funders. You're now dropping the Gen Z in preference for a broad-based government. The broad-based government ministers are insulting the intelligence of the public. This is dangerous. And finally, in the face of this kind of misconduct, you're willing to use repressive measures against critics, honest critics, in an environment where your tax collections have stalled. Year on year, you're not collecting more taxes, but your budget is increasing. They say that KRA's data shows that revenue has slowed, its growth rate has slowed to its slowest rate in a decade, excluding COVID. Only COVID, that period of the lockdown, was worse than this year, or these past 2 years, economically. And I appreciate that it's possible to look at the data and show growth. But you know, if the growth is basically massive infrastructure projects like the affordable housing, and fine, it's possible that those are employing tens of thousands of Kenyans a year. But so long as your Kenyans don't have money in their pockets, that growth is meaningless. So long as there are no more jobs, that growth is meaningless. You still have legacy wage agreements that must be met to trade unions. But you also have an IMF program which says that you will not raise wages. So in this kind of environment, the patron is constrained on what he can really do, which requires him to change direction. He needs to face the people more than he is facing his financiers and political colleagues. He needs to reduce the conspicuous consumption. How is it possible that in the last 2 years, the National Treasury was actually proposing in this 2024 budget to cut school feeding programs, where you have entries in the budget for renovations of the state houses, the deputy president's residencies. You had provisions for the spouses of presidents, the deputy president, and our friend, the chief cabinet secretary. I think this is absurd. It is absurd. You should respond to Kenyans when they're keeping a track on what kind of shoes and belts and watches you're wearing. You should respond when rumors fly that a governor has been arrested in London with cash in a bank, another minister has been arrested in Dubai with cash in a satchel. You must respond. But it's deafening silence. Instead, we just have hard tackling of critics, media intimidation. In the last 2 years, or in the last year, an order was given to stop adverts with the media. NGOs have been written to and told to align their manifesto align their projects with the manifesto of Kenya Kwanza, which, as I showed you, only got a third of the registered vote. And finally, there was the bizarre allegation that the Ford Foundation was funding anti-government protests over tax increases. The harassment of institutions, the controller of budget, is actually facing criminal charges. Some trumped up accusation that when she was an official of a SACCO, somebody's money got lost. Nothing to do with her, but anything to stop her from revealing that the wage bill of state officers in Kenya is padded. And she only discovered it when she looked at her own office's budget, where she discovered that there was enough money put aside for her salary to pay 2 controllers of budget. You have continuing threats to defund the Auditor General and the courts. You're hearing this from the national government. Now you're even hearing the Nairobi governor saying that the controller of budget, because she points out that he spent 0 on development, they need to do something about her. You know, this is not the right direction. The right direction is to listen to these people who are producing actual statistics and then to respond. You must respond to more than the American prosecutors in New York. The DPP is obviously now back in the control of the executive. The last 2 DPPs, the current incumbent and the past, have dropped. In this report, we've written up a list of about 30 prominent persons who have had corruption cases dropped. Usually, where the EACC is concerned, it is objecting to the withdrawal of these cases. Sometimes, as in the case of a former minister, the court itself says that it's only that you have this authority, but this case doesn't deserve to be dropped. That's the kind of situation we're in. We have parliamentarians and the government trying to reverse regulations that are meant to prevent money laundering. The report documents multiple attempts to raise the cash reporting threshold. You know, if you go to a bank today and you try to withdraw more than the equivalent of $10,000 or a million shillings, let's say, you need to state the purpose for this withdrawal. And there surely shouldn't be too much wrong with that, because cash payments are capable of being used in a corrupt way, so it's best if they are recorded. So at least we know that this MP came and took out 50 million shillings because he needed to go to a church harambe. Why doesn't he just do a wire transfer? So what they're saying, or what they're trying to do, or trying to convince Parliament to do, is to raise this threshold, to triple it, because, you know, you've got an idea. The companies law was changed to require that every company must state the actual owner, because in Kenya we have a lot of proxy directors. But when we were trying to investigate the independent power producer companies before the Energy Committee of Parliament, the registrar of companies himself appears there to say, I cannot tell you who the true owners of these independent power producers are. You have to ask why. And then Parliament let him leave. That Energy Committee let him leave. There are MPs, and we give two examples, who the President in the State of the Nation address the other day said they have stalled the conflict of interest bill in Parliament. They won't pass it, they won't debate it, they won't give it time. It's not been brought to us for public participation. But there are other MPs in there, opposition MPs and government MPs, who are trying to delete provisions in the anti-corruption laws. One wants to remove the 10-year disqualification, because apparently when you are convicted of a crime of corruption, you're disqualified for 10 years from holding a public office. There's an MP in that house who thinks that's a bad idea. There's another one who wants to make it legal to engage in public procurement without having a budget, because many people are being charged with approving projects which were not budgeted for. And there's an MP in that house who thinks that's a good idea. And finally, in this new environment, and I should go back, and what has the President said about that? He made a joke about the stalled conflict of interest bill, but he knows very well that there are these other two little private members' bills which could very well pass. But he says nothing about it, not even just to say that he opposes those things. So we have, in the final analysis, many challenges. We have impunity, a patronage network which requires the patron to protect the people that we would ordinarily call corrupt for political considerations. We have institutions that are failing in their duties. And finally, we have new technological challenges. Some of these challenges are arising not out of any state policy, because nobody can complain about mobile money as something that is helping the majority of our people. But the scale of its daily transactions will shock you. And here we're talking about trillions of shillings per day. Fairly unregulated. And of course, AfriCOG is so dominant in that business that it's a single point of failure. Nairobi is also becoming a hub of regional criminality. So we have, the continuous wash seizures and it's becoming a money laundering base for corrupt elites from the region. We've got a gambling habit that can also be taken advantage of by international criminals. And of course, we have money transfer platforms. So in sum, I think I just wanted to say that on this International Anti-Corruption Day, we draw the conclusion we're heading in the wrong direction based on a report that will hopefully find favor with you, and we'd urge you to try and, if you agree with its findings or its information, to use it to pressure your government and your other leaderships, because something has to change. We can't be 20 years from Merida, when we were the first country to ratify the Convention Against Corruption, and then languish in this perpetual state of domination by a very, very, very corrupt leadership. I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mwalimu, for that comprehensive overview. I think you'll agree with me that he's really covered many of the aspects of the Ruto regime, which are not very different from former regimes, particularly his immediate former and former dynamic duo bromance partner, Uhuru Kenyatta. So, but he is operating in a much more constrained environment. The headroom for financial misbehavior is shrinking, which means it's becoming increasingly cannibalistic. I'm going to depart from the program that you have in your folders. I'm going to invite a friend and partner of the organization, George Kigoro, to say a few words. George Kigoro works with the Open Society Foundation and works on advocacy in Africa. And he's only able to be here for a short while, so I think we could also use a change of pace. So we'll first listen to George before we then come back to the few things that I was going to say, after which we'll have a short tea break. Yeah? You can come this side. Yeah. I should say George isn't just working for the Open Society Foundations. Several of the reports which we have, which are lying outside on the tables, were written by him. He's had an immense contribution to the efforts to improve governance in Kenya, being the secretary to the Goldenberg Commission, secretary to the Waki Commission, leading the ICJ Kenya, leading Kenya Human Rights Commission, etc. Too many things to say, but you have before you a real, a real huge resource in terms of working to improve the governance of this country. George, welcome.
Thank you so much, Gladwell, and you're very, very kind. I would just start with sort of a message of solidarity and congratulations to Gladwell for being so consistent in the leadership that she and AfriCOG provide in the kind of conversations that we are having today, and the one that we had last week when we launched the other report on Kenya's indebtedness to China. These are examples of the extremely useful leadership that AfriCOG has provided in this space. AfriCOG is important because they document when people speak. Finally, once it is written down, it elevates the conversations to new levels. It enables us to have engagements with policymakers, and the work that they do also enables us to marshal the evidence necessary for the kind of activism and action that is needed to try and make the change that the change happen. And also to thank Mwalimu for being such a gem for such a long time. His thoughtfulness and the kind of high-level high-level information that he provides in these types of spaces is also rare and a needed quality for the kind of work that we are trying to do. So I'm old enough to, as Gladwell has said, to have been involved in some of the previous conversations on anti-corruption in the country, going back to the Golden Bag scandal. When Golden Bag was first discovered, it became the subject of very, very significant media coverage. There was in the nation at the time a serialization of the details of the Golden Bag scandal. Every day it was serialized by Sarah Elderkid. If you're old enough, you remember that. And there was massive public interest in the Golden Bag and its details when it first broke out. I believe that was 1991. It stayed in the public mind at the time as an example of the organization of high-level corruption. And that early effort of 1991, 1992 is what finally leads to the Commission of Inquiry when Kibaki takes power 10 years later. Let's go back to that documentation that had happened 10 years earlier to see whether the public can, what can be done about bringing accountability in relation to the Golden Bag, what actually happened in Golden Bag. Unfortunately, when Kibaki takes power in 2002, from 2005, just 2 years later, we get the Anglo leasing scandal, which is also a high-level, a high-profile, extremely expensive scandal that Kibaki inherited from the Moi regime, but which his own government continues to perpetuate. And that also has a lot of public attention at the time. The reason why those two scandals got as much attention as they did is because the public believed at the time that the stated anti-corruption commitment by the government, particularly the government of Kibaki, was actually something that was capable of being carried out. What I think has happened in the time after that is that belief that something credible and tangible can be done against corruption, the belief has since waned, because after the massive public expenditure on unearthing the details of the Golden Bag scandal through the Commission of Inquiry, nothing really became of that effort. And as a friend of mine says, the Commission of Inquiry into the Golden Bag Commission was actually a burial ceremony for that scandal. Nothing, we needed a big ceremony, a big expensive burial ceremony for Golden Bag, and that became the Commission of Inquiry itself. So the public mind now is in this space where there are not that many people who think that there is still a capacity to do anything about corruption in this country. In the period after that, including the early period of Uhuru Kenyatta comes into power. He, in 2005, 2006, as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, he leads a parliamentary inquiry into Anglo-leasing. That's how Anglo-leasing comes into the public space. They go to London as the Public Accounts Committee. They interviewed John Githongo in 2006. John is still in exile. They do a big report on Anglo-leasing, and Uhuru says, they're going to act as a parliamentary committee. But what does Uhuru do when he comes to power in 2013? He pays 1.4 billion to Anglo-leasing himself. That which he was fighting as PSC, a pending Anglo-leasing bill is paid under his watch. All that shows that the alliance, the corruption alliance, the capture alliance in this country has got unseen power, and that power is so strong that it moves presidents and the top leadership of this country from one position during one season of opposition to the kind of corrupt practices that are represented by Anglo-leasing to being to paying the same corrupt alliances themselves. Anti-corruption, a credible anti-corruption agenda is the result of an alliance between three elements. The first is political leadership. One has to have a political leadership that is committed to an anti-corruption agenda. Kibaki in 2003 was viewed by the public as sufficiently committed to anti-corruption, at least based on what they had said before they took power as NAC. They said enough to make people believe that they were interested in and could do something about anti-corruption. So, and since 2003, we have not had a political leadership that had public credibility against corruption in the way that Kibaki did. So that is the first element. The second element is you have to have in place a set of competent public institutions, whether they be anti-corruption commissions, whether they be the judiciaries, whether they be the media, and so on and so forth. So an alliance of competent public institutions is the second needed precondition to fighting corruption. The third is you have to have in place a supportive public opinion. You have to have a population that believes that it is important to fight corruption and that also believes that it is possible to do so. The failure, the anti-corruption failures of the Kibaki regime have ultimately been particularly costly for the country, because Kibaki is the first president that came to power on an anti-corruption agenda but then failed to do anything about corruption. What that did for the public is that it set the possibility, the belief that anything could be done against corruption very far back. Kenyatta, after Kibaki, didn't come to power on the basis he was going to fight corruption. He was just going to fight him and Ruto. They were just going to fight their cases against the ICC. That's the basis on which they took power the first time and kept power largely on that basis. And Ruto, going by what David Ndias told us, they disavowed any fight against corruption when they were campaigning for power 2 years ago. So they didn't promise anything against corruption, and they're clearly saying, don't hold us into account in the fight against corruption, because we are not going to do anything about it. We can't. So the point I'm making with this analysis is that alliance of the three sort of pillars, anti-corruption pillars, a conducive political leadership, a supportive public opinion, and a competent public institutions, and a supportive public opinion. That alliance of three pillars to fight corruption has actually frayed. It has collapsed. As a public, we don't believe it is possible to fight corruption. As a political leadership, we have a political leadership that says we don't care, we don't want to fight corruption. And what we then tend to try and do is to push the anti-corruption fight into the responsibility of these public institutions, whether they be the Anti-Corruption Commission, whether they be the courts, and so on and so forth. What could they ever do on their own? They can't. If as courts, as EACC or whatever it is, you try and do anything meaningful, credible against corruption, any long-ranging efforts that you do would actually be risky for your job, even for your life, depending on what the interests are. So what is the message for today? What is my message for today? We have to, the conversation has to be, how do we reinstate the alliance against corruption that is based on these three institutional support pillars that we have lost. Mwalimu has talked about what Gen Z did, how the government reacted to Gen Z, or seemed to react to Gen Z initially, and how they have quickly abandoned that reaction. It is as though Gen Z is, what Gen Z represented is a distant memory, something that is no longer a threat. That demonstrates the level of business. It's actually very, very difficult for political will to generate by itself. It is impossible because inside the political edifice, the interests that promote corruption are so entrenched, and there are so many, that if you start to do anything about it, even as the leadership itself, you will actually risk your own, you would risk regime survival. So it is easier for this government to try and fight truth tellers that are saying there's corruption and so on and so forth. It is less of a risk for them to to fight external enemies that are trying to hold them into account than to start anything credible against corruption, because everything they do on an everyday basis, from the bottom to the very top, is based on a perpetuation of their way of life. So we shouldn't expect that they can change. They are not capable of changing, and if they try to change, it will actually endanger the regime. That is why we had this promise. That's why we had a dissolution of cabinet and a reappointment of the same cabinet, because if anything was done to shake up the cabinet in anything that was meaningful, the government would fall, because it is built on promises made to people that are based on it's a corrupt alliance. It is basically a corrupt alliance, and if you try to move one piece, everything will collapse, because all the pieces that are in will remind you, we had a deal before you took power. We came to power together. It was based on this deal. This is my piece of the deal. And if I'm not going to get my piece of the deal, I'm going to incite all the other people, or I'll go and speak to I'll go Ndatoboa, or whatever it is that people will do. So if we understand it that way, I think then it explains the moment where we are in, and it explains the need, I hope, for us to regroup in the fashion that I'm hoping that we can, in terms of how do we reignite a true anti-corruption alliance that is based on an identification of the weaknesses and that have gotten us to this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. I think now that George is pointing us forward, we have looked at the problems, and now we're beginning to think of a possible way forward. I think this would be an appropriate moment to have a tea break. We'll have a tea break. We're running behind time, of course. We started late, so I think 15 minutes, and then you'll be called back in. You will get tickets for the refreshments at both exits as you go out. So please get a ticket so you can then go proceed to get some refreshments. Describes the seizure of political, legal, and economic levers of a nation by an unaccountable elite. We talked about laws which were changed, for example, policies which were adopted. So there you're not just getting a contract to build a house, you're actually getting a policy passed, which you end up then benefiting from if you're a cement baron or steel baron, or if you're involved in, I don't know, building railroads or something. So it fail to safeguard a nation's democracy, rule of law, and resources. When state capture takes hold, the machinery of the state starts to favor specific groups rather than the public interest, okay? So we're not spending money on education, we're not spending money on maternal welfare, we're taking scholarships away from students, but we are entering into very expensive projects which benefit a few people. It does not exist in national vacuums. It is typically enabled by transnational networks, and its proceeds are routinely laundered through the global financial system. Wherever it occurs, state capture leads to endemic corruption, poverty, and socioeconomic disparity, human rights abuses, media censorship, resource depletion, and environmental degradation. So how does it succeed? It rests on the ability of a small group of powerful and rich operatives to take over and pervert the institutions of democracy while keeping the facade of a functioning democracy. So it looks as if we have a democracy. We have a parliament, we have the executive, we have the judiciary, but increasingly power is not there. Checks and balances are eroded. The judiciary is defunded, not given enough funds. Individual judges may be threatened, the parliament is either bought or the opposition is sidelined. We've seen all this. So we have the facade of democracy without actually having the substance of it. We line up for elections every 5 years to vote for leaders, or not vote for leaders, but it seems that those are quite performative exercises, which don't lead to the will of the people being expressed. The electoral management body is compromised and allowed to run riot and do all sorts of procurement corruption. Law enforcement, the police are allowed to bribe while authorities look the other way, turning itself into almost a sort of gangster system where bribes are taken from the lower levels and funneled up to the top, as we've seen when we look at the police vetting procedures and other reports on police corruption. So civic space is shrunk, and the prosecution of there's impunity. So prosecution of those purported to be guilty, alleged to be guilty of corruption, are often the precursors of inaction. They often end up being dropped, as we'll see in the report. We have a list of many charges which were dropped against prominent people. So the elite have become expert at projecting motion without progress. So we have all sorts of activities in our history. You're all aware of them. We mentioned some of the commissions, Goldenberg, and other commissions of inquiry, which have not led to much because they were mainly instruments to divert public anger, to diffuse public anger. So capture can be stable. It doesn't necessarily have to always be unstable and full of agitation. It can simply mean that the elite has found a way to structure the political system, and it has been quite resilient. Kenya's system of, the politicians who are in power have been in power for as long as many of you can remember. So it's quite a resilient system. But of course it came under a very significant threat this time. So I don't want to anticipate the discussion on ways forward, but I think we can look at some of the ways in which we can address this very, very entrenched kind of corruption. So I hope that I gave you some idea as to what we mean when we say state capture. So I would now invite the panelists to make their remarks. We'll start with Sheila Masinde, who is the Executive Director of Transparency International Kenya. And she will be making remarks on institutional capture, issues of conflict of interest, and the way forward. Welcome, Sheila. You don't have to, because I'm short.
Okay. Thank you. Viva anti-corruption fighters, viva! Viva! Thank you very much. I think this is a very important occasion we're having on a very important day in the calendar of anti-corruption fighters. And it's really an honor to share the platform with people who have strived to fight for integrity, for transparency, and for accountability for many years. Gladwell, Mwalimu Mati, who are my predecessors at Transparency International Kenya. I only see your names in old letters and emails. But of course we do engage a lot, especially with Gladwell, on a lot of initiatives. We've gone to court together, we've done statements together and done many, many things together, and I'm really grateful for the continued solidarity that AfriCOG continues to provide, and also the leadership and the thought leadership, particularly on initiatives like this in terms of research. And I know because you were in TI, you remember how evidence is so important. Yes, we still say we are evidence-driven in terms of our advocacy. So we rely on research like this and the recommendations that come out, the findings and the recommendations for us to be able to act and fight corruption in an even stronger way. So this report is really, really important in terms of urging us forward and showing us what are the gaps that we need to fill. I'm particularly impressed because it documents a series of corruption scandals and cases in the last, actually goes beyond the 2 years of the regime to almost the final year, if I may say, and even I think earlier of the Uhuru regime, and also makes reference to some earlier cases which would be important for us to look at. So really the findings, I had the opportunity to read the report, really resonate with our work in terms of where we feel we need to push the needle further to be able to address the corruption issues. And it's quite timely, looking at where we were 3 months ago with the Gen Z protests, the anti-finance bill protests, where Kenyans were united to demand for good governance and improved accountability so that we can be able to enhance our economy. At the heart of those protests was really the high level of corruption that has made majority of Kenyans live in a very, very desperate state. Kenyans are hungry and angry. Families are broke and broken. And access to services has really been affected by corruption. Currently, looking at the experiments and all these models that are being tried in the education system that have brought our public education system, especially with the public university, there's a crisis there with this new education financing model, which I'm really still trying to understand. Look at the health sector with the shisha, shoe, whatever you want to call it. But really the health sector is really on the teeters, on the brink, due to the flawed rollout of the social health insurance fund. Look at the housing fund as well, really little accountability. And now issues are emerging. You know, we've always suspected that there's a problem, but if you saw the news and the social media last week, you can now see that clearly this could have been an initiative that was designed to give people an opportunity to steal. And we must demand accountability in that regard. Meanwhile, as Kenyans are struggling with less money in their pockets, increased taxes and all these contributions we have to make, the new kids on the block, the ones who have been in power for the last 2 years, the new power holders and brokers, are quickly amassing wealth and displaying it unashamedly. And I'm glad that AfriCOG has taken the pain to just document where the cases and where we are losing money. And we will use that report to hold the institutions accountable. I'm just from a function, a government function, to mark the Anti-Corruption Day. We have a forum called the Kenya Leadership Integrity Forum, which brings all the sectors together. And so we had come together just to mark the day. And my challenge to them really was, if you're in that particular office, you have been given a particular mandate to fight corruption, to protect public resources, there will be a time when you will be asked, what did you do in that office? What did you do in that position to fight corruption? Did you watch on the sidelines? Did you sit on the fence? Or did you actually have the courage to tackle corruption head on? I think one of the things that we are lacking currently, as I was listening to Gladwell and your slides on stage capture, you just touched on the issues around the institutions. We have a big problem. The institutions have been captured. They are being either through intimidation, either through defunding, by being denied funds. The ones that are willing to fight, where there are individuals willing to fight, have not been given adequate resources to work. Those who are willing to fight are also being intimidated. But then there are others who are collaborating and allowing the state and the president and the powers that be to meddle in their functions. And I always say, if we had institutions that just looked at their mandate and respected the Constitution, adhered to the Constitution, we wouldn't be where we are today. The problem of corruption would have been better managed. All these issues around human rights violations and others would also have been avoided. But because we have people who are sitting in institutions that do not have the courage, basically we have the wrong people in office across the board, whether it is in executive, whether it is in parliament, whether it is in independent offices and commissions. That is a starting point. And then we, of course, go to the issues around the capture of the systems. So those are things that we need to reform. And that's why for us, we've been really pushing for the Chapter 6 and the implementation of the Constitution on leadership and integrity to ensure that you have the right people in office. There's a disturbing pattern of corruption, as I've mentioned earlier, corrupted projects. By the time those projects are being shoved down our throats as Kenyans, people have sat and they know how they are going to steal. They know how many contracts are going to come out of this project and who is socially or politically connected is going to get or be awarded that particular procurement contract. We've seen it in housing, We've seen it in the various scandals touching on food, chakula. Mnakumbuka kashfa ya mahindi? Mnakumbuka? Kuna ile ya mafuta ya kupika, kuna kashfa ya mchele, kuna kashfa gani tena ingine? Sukari. I had Gladys talking about it, the contaminated sugar. Yeah? And then you ask yourself, and then there's a fertilizer case. Ask yourself, why are most of these cases happening in one sector? Because it's the easiest sector to control, manipulate, and where cartels can thrive. What you simply need to do is kill the productive sectors. Do you hear them talking about agriculture anymore? Who knows even the agriculture CS? Do you hear them talking about agriculture? Kilimo. Nani ako katika wizara ya kilimo? Mmemsikia akiongea kuhusu the policies or initiatives that they're driving in agriculture. Every time they come to Western Kenya, they cheat us that we are going to revive, what is that sugar company called? Pan paper was a paper one. There are all those sugar factories. There is Mumias, there is Nzoia, there is Chemelil. There are so many of them. That is what they say when they come there. But have they ever been revived? I think we've had those promises time without number. Yeah, we keep on hearing promises about what will be done to enhance agriculture, but is it ever done? The reason this is not happening, and also consider what's happening in the manufacturing sector, why these sectors are being killed, is because the fastest way to make a quick buck in this country is through importations. And that's why most of these cases that we have been dealing with, the rice imports, the contaminated sugar imports, the edible oil imports, which other one? Fertilizer are also imports. Or those ones, the stones and whatever was in there were mixed here in Kenya. Yeah? But just think about it. These are things that we have to be able to tackle. So there's a question around every initiative that has come from this government. By the time it is being passed, whether it is in parliament or whether it is in cabinet, people have already sat down and said, ini yangu, ini yangu. In fact, I always joke, I try to picture sometimes how those cabinet meetings go. I don't think it's cabinet meetings about policies. It possibly is meetings about deals. Hii deal ni ya nani, hii deal itaenda kwa nani, and so on. Because it's only the politically and the socially connected people who are thriving. Remember the vetting of cabinet ministers. And my question was, and of course we have challenged, has even gone to court in terms of challenging the vetting process in regard to what can be more meaningful in terms of the questions that we need to ask some of these people who have been vetted for public office. Some of those ministers declared huge differences from when they were vetted in 2022 to 2024. No one asked them, how are your businesses thriving to the extent that you have been able to triple your net worth as other Kenyans are closing their businesses? Have you asked yourself why? Why is it just a few people who seem to be thriving while businesses are closing every other day because of the poor performing economy? Why is it only those socially and politically connected who are thriving? These are some of the cases that have been documented in this report could be the reason why. But there's a lot we need to do in regard to demanding accountability for some of these cases. I think the other disturbing pattern I've seen is the changing of legislation and policies, or sometimes the proposals of new legislation or new policies, like we had the Housing Act. We've had, of course, when you look at the finance bill that was rejected, and even the last finance bill, there are a lot of provisions there that just tell you these proposals are supposed to benefit a particular person or group. So we've seen legislative and policy capture when you look at housing, health, and education, and so on. Remember the G2G oil scandal as well. Why do they have to change systems? There's a lot of changes in the systems. When someone comes into office, why do they feel that they have to overhaul the way things have been done? It's because you're looking for an opportunity to steal. And what we have pushed for, and I hope that we can continue to push now that we have documented some of these cases in the report, is for institutions like the Office of the Auditor General to specifically audit some of those initiatives. That is imperative. And even the EACC to conduct special investigations on some of these cases. I've often asked some of these institutions, have you guys investigated or are you doing anything on this Adani or edible oil or G2G? And normally people go mute. And you can understand why, or maybe not understand why, but you can imagine why they have no response to that. It is because some of those issues they don't want to touch them, but they must, and we must push them. They are in office to ensure accountability, and we must demand that those institutions do their work in terms of giving us answers in regard to who are responsible for these cases and the loss of funds, and ensure that these people are actually held to account. One of the other things that we have also proposed, and I will add on as I read the report as a recommendation, is how can we also strengthen the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act, because you can tell there are a lot of procurement issues. EFCC will actually tell you that 90% of the cases they investigate touch on procurement and issues around conflict of interest. So issues around procurement, conflict of interest. We have a pending conflict of interest bill that has been in Parliament now I think it was developed in 2018, has been in Parliament now almost 2 years, and we must demand that it is actually passed. There were attempts to adulterate it by Senate, but we understand that now it's under mediation, but we must demand that conflict of interest bill to be enacted so that we can now really deal with issues around conflict of interest more seriously. The other thing that we also need to look at are the public-private partnership laws. And recently we saw the Adani case. They are still, in fact, when the president cancelled the deal, I was left with more questions than answers, because there are questions around, okay, what is the cost to the Kenyan taxpayer? He talked about an investigative report that he was given, which guided his decision to cancel the process of contracting Adani. Where is that investigative report? Who are implicated in that report? Shouldn't they be held accountable? Because Kenyans are suspecting that there's quite a bit more that we don't know about that particular Adani deal and the many others that have been mentioned in the health sector and even in the energy sector, and God knows many other sectors maybe where the spotlight has not been shined on the particular engagement that they could be having with Adani. The other, I think, issue that I want to raise as I conclude, when you talk about captured, weakened, politically manipulated institutions, is a question around the management of corruption cases. And I sometimes feel like a broken record. Is it you say broken record player or what? Broken tape, because this is something I've continuously advocated for. We need reforms in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. We cannot have a public prosecutor who is paid by taxpayer money, but he works harder to defend the criminals than even the defense lawyers of the accused. We've seen that. When you look at how some of these cases have been handled, the cases that have been withdrawn, the cases that even judges, the trial magistrates, in their rulings have said that they've had to acquit their case. The prosecution brought 42 witnesses that it did not question. These are your witnesses, but they get to the stand and you say pass. you will not interrogate. So who's supposed to interrogate them? And what happens to all the funds that have been used to investigate those cases, listen and to hear and determine those cases? We need accountability, and that is why early this year, together with AfriCOG and other civil society partners, we decided that enough was enough, that we were now going to seek individual liability from the prosecutors. We were tired of statements, we were tired of petitions. We took a petition to the Public Service Commission seeking to remove the former Director of Public Prosecution from office. We're still waiting for a response from the Public Service Commission, but we decided that now we'll go to court, and we're waiting to see how that case pans out. There was a Oparanya matter just recently, and you saw that whole drama between EACC and the Director of Public Prosecution, where the DPP decided to, previously we've dealt with withdrawal of cases. Now we were dealing with withdrawal of the decision to charge. You've already made a decision to charge, but then you unashamedly now say, no, I will not. I have now, as I have sat as a prosecutor, meaning now you have assumed the role of a judge and adjudicated the matter even before it goes to the court and determined that the individual is not guilty. And that money in question was actually a loan, not a kickback, as the EACC investigation found. We are dealing with crooks in public office, people. There's a big problem, and we must demand accountability. So currently we are pushing for reforms. We are pushing for particularly reforms in the decision to charge guidelines and in terms of how the Director of Public Prosecutions makes those decisions to withdraw cases, because this has even been raised as a problem by the bench. I want to stop there, but we clearly have our work cut out as corruption fighters, but we can't give up. Today, the theme of the International Anti-Corruption Day is uniting youth against corruption. And I think it is a very, very relevant theme, especially looking at what we have undergone as a country in the last 3 months, where the youth led Kenyans in demanding for good governance. And I often ask people, what are you doing to ensure that we hand over a better country to tomorrow's future? So you, where you're seated, what are you doing in your individual capacity to fight corruption? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila, for those remarks. Now we have just one more speaker, and thank you so much for your patience. We have not given you a chance to interact with us, and I know that would have been important. So thanks Sheila for pointing out all the different things that could be done. But the lesson we learned today, we have one of the most elaborate systems in the world. So it must be based on what George was talking about, that resurrection of the political coalition of those who are willing to continue the demand for reform. I want to invite Sam Mwara, the CEO of the Private Sector Development Trust, to make some remarks. Sam, I'm going to be unjust to you. You're the last one, and you've been with us since this morning. Just 10 minutes on the potential for religious organizations to lead citizens to fight corruption. Thank you very much, Sam. You have the floor.
Thank you. I have been given 10 minutes, and therefore you will forgive me if I am very quick on a topic that is perhaps the most important for all of us in Kenya. Now, I want to address myself to the role of the citizens and what we can do to succeed in the fight against corruption. I state up front that this fight is winnable and it is doable. Now, George Kigoro, the previous speaker, talked about three partnerships which are critical to the winning of this battle. One is government, political will. Two is the institutions of government that are charged with the responsibility to fight corruption. And thirdly, it is the engagement of the citizens in order to call the government to account on this issue of corruption. And of the three pillars, the weakest one is the citizens. And yet it happens to be the most important. Without citizens engaged in this fight, it's never going to work. So what are the root causes of corruption in Kenya? The first one is failure of government to comply with the law. The second one is lack of citizen engagement in governance. The third one is high cost of doing politics. The fourth one is a bloated government. The fifth one is lack of institutional framework for the engagement of the non-state actors led by the religious organizations. So I will comment very briefly what can be done regarding these 6 areas. Now, the government failing to follow the law, I will quote 2 or so critical laws that the government failed to follow with disastrous consequences. The first law is the Public Finance Management Act 2012, Section 15(2)(c). That law provides that the government should only use borrowed money for development, and that repayment for those borrowings, the capital or the principal and interest, should come from the recurrent expenditure of government. And then finally, that borrowings should go towards financing specific projects which are included in the budget and in the Appropriation Act. Now, because this law was not followed, we are planning this year to spend 1.85 trillion shillings in debt servicing. If the law was followed, that amount would have been a maximum of 770 billion shillings. So we are spending more than 1 trillion more than what we should have spent, and it's money that we do not have. Secondly, our tax revenue is around 2.2 trillion. So if you remove the 1.85 debt servicing, it leaves government with 350 billion shillings to run the country. It does not take a genius to understand that you cannot run a country with 350 billion shillings. The wage bill alone is 1.2 trillion. And therefore the government is bankrupt. Understand that, and there's no amount of politicking that will change that fact. The next problem is lack of citizen engagement. But before I go there, I can actually quote a second law. And this is the law, the same PFM Act 2012, that provides for government to spend a maximum of 35% of the tax revenue on the wage bill. That would equate to 770 billion, as I've stated, with regard to the debt. But the actual is 1.24. So we are overspending on the wage bill 474 billion shillings a year. Financing ghost workers, financing irresponsible hiring of people. In some counties, you have an average of 14 drivers for one vehicle. So it's just complete irresponsibility on the part of government. So lack of citizen engagement, which is the problem. We have been given all the power that we need as citizens. As you know, Article 1 of our Constitution provides that all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. We have failed to exercise that power, and we are expecting, misplaced expectation it happens to be, that it is the politicians who will come and help us to implement that provision of the Constitution. And yet that Constitution, or that provision, takes away power from the politicians. So they're not going to do any such thing. We as citizens must come forward and help ourselves to implement that article. So the first requirement is to institutionalize the citizens from the village all the way down to, all the way up to the national level. We have demonstrated in a pilot that we have done in Kiladeshwa ward that you can organize the citizens under a ward neighborhood association with a framework all the way down to the households. And the transformation that has occurred in that ward since that organization was done some 5, 6 or so years ago is there to be seen by everybody. That community believes very strongly that it is the answer. Organizing the community is the answer to fixing our development problems. So that is something we must do across the entire Nairobi and countrywide. And what is more, there are laws that provide that organized citizens will be facilitated by government to do the work. The third issue is high cost of doing politics. It is high cost because politics in this country is financed by vested interests. People, and George Kegoro went into that, people finance government in the expectation that they will get a payback. The money they invested will be repaid with a huge profit. What we must do as citizens is to be the owners and drivers of political parties. At the moment, political parties are owned by the politicians, they are owned by individuals, and they are used as vehicles to get into power rather than vehicles through which you govern the country. We must oversight under this area of political governance. We must, as organized citizens, oversight the IEBC from the national to constituency down to the polling station level. Because the IEC is the government arm for elections. And good governance has two sides. Government on one side and organized citizens on the other side. The role of the citizens is to oversight government, and there is nobody else who can oversight government because it is the citizens who have the sovereign power. They have the political authority to enforce accountability on government. If we don't do it, Parliament fails to do it, the independent institutions, including EACC, have failed to do it. So it's only the citizens who can restore order in this equation. If you doubt that citizens can perform this job, you just have to reflect back on the work that was done by Gen Zs. In 2 weeks, Gen Zs achieved what we as their parents have failed to do for over 20, 30 years. They demonstrated that the job of holding the government to account by citizens is doable. The next problem is the issue of bloated government. We have bloated government and top-heavy government. The cure of this is for government to finally implement village governance. Village governance is created and provided for in the County Governments Act 2012. It provides for government to create village councils at the ward, village, and one level below the village. That was done in Makueni by the retired Governor Kivuta Kibwana. And within no time, he transformed Makueni. Makueni became the best performing county of all the counties in the country. His secret was organized citizens. He organized his citizens, and he organized and implemented village governance. And he unlocked the potential of the entire community. And that is what we now must do across all the counties. There is a new law created by the Senate which provides for the county governments to allocate a minimum of 60% of their development budget for use in the counties, in the wards. When that happens, and it will only happen if we enforce accountability, then it means that every ward in this country will receive an allocation of minimum 50 million shillings a year for small infrastructure and development projects. A county like Nairobi, which is wealthier, will receive a minimum of 80 million shillings a year. If you bring 80 million shillings in our ward every year, in 5 years we'll have transformed that ward, even with no other money from government. If we implement the village governance and we organize the citizens and the citizen organization to mirror government, we would be able to cut government by 50%. You reduce the wards by 50%, and incidentally that was the recommendation of the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution under Charles Nyachai in their final report. They recommended that we reduce the wards to 700 down from 1450. You cut the constituencies by 50%, you don't need them. You cut the county governments by 50%. The government has admitted that itself, that there are too many unsustainable county governments. And you convert the current county governments into service delivery centers. And otherwise you create larger and more viable county governments. Now the parastatals of government, you can cut them by even 90%. But I'm being generous, cut them by 50% as a starting point, and departments of government. That way you have a lean and efficient government that is not gobbling up all the resources that we are able to raise in this country. Now, going back to the item number 6, which is organization of all the non-state actors. The citizens break down into communities and stakeholders. The religious sector is one of the critical stakeholders. But organized communities can now partner with the religious organizations, with the civil society, with business, to create a framework for the non-state actors to perform two functions. First of all, to operate on the demand side of governance. Without citizens joining governance, we'll be busy going nowhere. Secondly, to do advocacy and hold the government to account. So we are inviting the religious organizations to lead that framework, because religious organizations are the ones with God-given mandate to look after the poor, and that is in the Bible. Therefore you will find them willing to work with us as citizens and other stakeholders to create a strong framework for the non-state actors. The framework to start from the village all the way down to all the way up to the national level. We will allocate a special role for the religious organizations, a role that we are not performing particularly well. You are familiar with the associations, business, stakeholder, and neighborhood associations. Those associations always deal and prioritize sectoral issues. And yet, our problem is the cross-cutting issues. Public debt, corruption, wastage in government, impunity of government, lack of political governance. All that is what we are packaging and asking the religious organizations to lead, so that they have representation in the organs of governance as institutions, and we are proposing that men, women, and youth who are organized under the religious organizations also take that role, so that we have champions for these cross-cutting issues. Remember, it's the cross-cutting issues that constitute the baking of the cake. And if we do not bake a bigger cake, then there is not enough cake for sharing amongst the different communities and interests. And we'll end up fighting, continue to fight the way we do in the sharing of an ever-shrinking size of the cake. Now, where do we start? We will start with enforcing accountability, because the people who have failed to do their job are the members of parliament. We delegated authority to them to oversight government. They have failed to do so. So, the first thing we will do is that we will recall our MPs. And that has been proposed by the religious organizations. They are 100% correct. We will carry out lifestyle audit on the MPs. Some MPs have accumulated some obscene amounts of money in the 2 years since they got elected. They had nothing and now they are multi-billionaires. So we want them to explain how they acquired all that wealth within that time. And we will petition the ACC to come and carry out lifestyle audit on those MPs. You will know the assets of your own MP, where you come from. And therefore, communities will work with the ACC in order to get that job done. In the last report of the Auditor General on the CDF committees, almost 100% of the CDF committees have massively embezzled money. They have abused use of the CDF kitty, and therefore we have enough ammunition to call for the disbanding of all those committees as part of our strong advocacy arising from today's conference. If we do not take these actions and expect that it's government that is benefiting from corruption that will be engineering the fight against corruption, we will be waiting from now until the end of the world. It will never happen. Those are just a few ideas that I have put on the table of what we can do as citizens. We are going to follow up on it as the team that organized this conference, and we are going to make sure that we start helping ourselves as citizens in the fight against corruption and in the improvement of governance in this country. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Sam, for that brief but extremely enlightening speech in terms of how we can organize ourselves in order to force the kind of changes that Kenyans have been yearning for so many years. Now we've really not, I have really not managed the time well, so we'll have a few minutes for questions from the floor. So if anybody has any question or comment, we would welcome them now. And I hope that there are enough mics going around to them. Does anybody have a question or comment? Or we've answered all your questions in advance. Or there's the lady with the white shirt with the green piping.
Thank you so much. My name is Margaret from CJPD. I appreciate each and everyone at the dais. Corruption is a mountain, and we have to climb the mountain to ensure that all our expectations are met. My feeling is this, or what I would comment on is, as we watch people spend and misuse our funds, we should also again ask ourselves, what role am I playing at the grassroots? Taking an example of my ward, if there is a project running, being run there by the governor, when I make a comment, which I think most of you may have done it, that comment is on how are you using these materials. For example, it's a road that is being constructed. You watch them giving maybe have an inch of tarmac. when you ask a question, they will tell you, okay, this is what we have been provided. The reason is this. Before that road was put or was passed on, we've not had enough information on how that road is going to be done. The one who has been given the contract hides the documents, or whoever is giving or passing the contract has not informed the citizens or the ward residents that a certain road is being put. So we have given so and so as the contractor, and we have the description is as it is. So when you ask a question, the contractor will tell you, this is what I've been provided with. When you move on to the governor to ask, why is this one happening, you are given threats, because they fear that you will enroute on the corruption being done. So my request is, as citizens, can we move and pinpoint the corrupt guys at the grassroots, so that as we get to our MPs who are constructing walls using CDF fund and such like, they give strangers those contracts so that you cannot get to know who is doing what. So as we watch the MPs and whoever is there mishandling our money, let us also go there and ensure that we ask a question. It's like, anyway, trying to put off fire with a few drops of water, but at least you have made a point. That is my take home.
Thank you very much. I guess the question revolves around transparency in contracting, and we've got some examples from around the world. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, using very simple, non-technological methods. For example, the MKSS movement in Rajasthan that paints what has the money that has been assigned to the community in the framework of government programs, and that's painted on the walls where everybody can see it, and they have the information, and we could also do things like that in Kenya. Nothing prevents us from doing so. Obviously, the question of follow-up is important. You have a question in the, yes?
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam. And I also thank the panelists for enabling us to gather here in order to actually reflect on the performance of the government within the past 3 years. Very quick, I'll go to some of the key highlights that have caught my attention. Number one, we are talking about our country going in the wrong direction. And that is actually tied to the transparency and the accountability part of it. Allow me to refer us to the Constitution of Kenya 2010, Chapter 6, which is dealing with leadership and integrity. My take is, why is it that we have gone to draft a conflict of interest bill, yet we have a chapter in the Constitution that has actually failed to put the political elite into question whenever they are caught up with corruption. And I feel that with the conflict of interest bill, it is something that should have been added, should have been drafted after we have enabled the codification of the leadership and integrity bit of our political space. Yes, so you'll find that there are lots of loopholes that are being created, and even with this bill, from where I sit, I'm saying that we are going to do more harm than good, because there are other areas that will not be addressed. And to summarize that bit is that what else can we do to actually shed more light or actually strengthen Chapter 6 of the Constitution, because I feel that is something that we need to look at. Number two, the previous speaker has just talked about the role of religious institutions in fighting corruption. Yes, there are some sections of the religious institutions that have been at the forefront in fighting against corruption. But I still feel that the political elite have also captured our religious institutions. That's because in as much as the Catholics and the Anglicans are actually vocal about fighting against corruption, what about these other existing mainstream churches? We've rarely had the clergy from the AIC, for example, the Adventists, for example, actually coming so strongly against this vice called corruption. So what else can we do in order to deliver the religious institutions from the state capture that we are currently seeing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take 2 more questions. I'm sorry, but we've got the gentleman in the jeans jacket and someone way at the back who's raised their hand. I can't see them. It's kind of dark back there. Excuse me. Please remember to state your name and any affiliation you may have.
I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself.
Sorry.
My name is Isaac Mongare. I'm from the Institute for Development Studies, University of Nairobi.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Commander John from Uraia Trust, and it's always listen to this kind of research, of course, supported by AfriCOG. My concern is regarding what has been mentioned by the speakers who have spoken today. We are seeing an increased interest amongst the youth to be at the forefront in championing for anti-corruption movement. And I think that is quite in line with this year's theme of the International Anti-Corruption Day, uniting the youth. And I'm just seated here wondering, how can we be able to galvanize this kind of interest and youth activism? We're seeing, for example, on X, a lot of people are getting concerned and are taking a lead in speaking out against bad governance practices. So I'm seated here wondering, how can we be able to support, how can we be able to sustain this kind of movement and use it as a dividend to push ourselves forward in the fight? I'm sure probably some of the speakers or anyone in the room might have some ideas, and I think one of them is, I look at it from a value-based perspective. Yeah, someone once said that corruption starts when you are young, when you are told you are given an incentive to do something and it grows. I don't know, probably you can reflect about it. And I know not very long ago, we had a report, I think, that said most young people are willing to take a bribe or are willing to get corrupt to of course, to do something. I mean, they're corruptible and they are ready to take any anti-corruption, corruption motive to do something. So I'm just wondering what insights the speakers would have and anyone in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman at the... so I'm sorry, I hadn't seen you. So those 2 are the last ones. We really do have to stop. This won't be the last time we'll be doing this. We will have other opportunities to engage. I want to apologize for not giving you enough opportunities to do so, but we intend to have other engagements, and our friend from Uraia just spoke, and I'm sure he will be able to assist us in doing that. So, Madam, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vicky Rajoro from Interreligious Council of Kenya Youth. I'm here trying to analyze, or to help me analyze, whereby devolution came to help and assist the people from the grassroots. In this case now, devolution have become even more intense. When it comes to where counties are more corrupt, governance are doing, I don't know how I'll put it in Christian way or in religious manner. I won't want to say rogue per se, because it's past rogue. As I would like to put in your organization, in which case do you do the follow-ups on what is happening on the grassroots levels, and also how are you making them accountable, especially in this case where now you get a county has 300 and something accounts, and no one is ready to explain to the citizens what are the accounts for? I had some days back, not 2 days, when the report came out about the accounts, and our governor from Nairobi was like, we can't handle our budget with the only 2 or 3 accounts. In which case is there a policy in this country that says a county should have this particular account, and if not, for accountability purposes of the citizen, how can citizen understand where their monies are going? Because they can put it in Nairobi, they take a lot of revenue, especially I can say $1 billion I don't know in months what. I would like to know mostly as a transparency, especially NGO, to at least give us, is there any way, as you do always put the watchdogs on the corrupt areas, how do they do that to make them at least accountable for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last question, please. The gentleman at the back, please. And if you keep your question short, perhaps we can squeeze in the gentleman who seemed to have something to say.
Yes, maybe you should say it first. He seems not to have been pleased that he was bypassed.
My name is Alan Wandera from Kenya News Agency. We've interacted before, but I think I was not contented being a Gen Z this generation, and I'm really bold to fight corruption. Don't you think that it is possible to take basic civic education to the rural and marginalized areas in our country, rather than focusing to the intellects who know how to read and write? It will be a very great privilege if we interact with the citizens in the rural and marginalized areas as AfriCOG by partnership with the churches and justice centers in our rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was I think a suggestion, not so much a question. It's a very good one. No single organization can do all this work themselves, and working in partnership with those who can amplify and disseminate the message and collaborating with them is obviously a very important strategy. Thank you for that. The last speaker.
Thank you very much. I'm Suba Churchill, and thank you. I'm here courtesy of the invite you extended to Paddy Onyango. And which came through to a WhatsApp group that I'm a member of, and I'm sorry I came in late. I thought Sam Mwaura would be bold enough to say it is time CDF was declared untenable. You know, disbanding those constituency development committees doesn't help much. This is a fund that has been declared unconstitutional several times. I've seen the latest maneuver by MPs to put together a committee to figure out how to make it constitutional. And I was wondering how they will manage to do that, because as long as their roles remain oversight, lawmaking, and representation, I do not see how even entrenching that will sit with the principles of separation of powers that is already entrenched in the Constitution. That's one. So would you not be bold enough to say you agree with the several court rulings, Sam Mwaura, that the reality is that MPs patronize and are the ones who run, literally like development officers, and direct how much is allocated for
speak on their own day. Then the Gen Zs will speak on the internet. Will the government feel the pressure, or they'll just use that platform and find a way to penetrate through to 2027, Right now the pressure is so much on social media. Why don't we take advantage of the already existing interest from the youth, from the church and the CSOs and really pressure this thing out? Because I know there is will and we know we can really root out corruption in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We come back to the panel. I'll leave it to you, the questions which you feel were directed to you, which you'd like to answer. And let's try and do it as briefly as possible. So, Sheila?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you all for your questions and your comments. I think from my colleague from Uraia on the youth, is that John? Hi, John. So it is, I think, for us, especially for us working in the civil society and even the religious sector and others, what we need to do now is encourage them to even do more in terms of demanding for accountability. Affirm, when they come out, we need to affirm them because they need solidarity as well. You know, this fight can often be a very lonely fight. Many times you can be stigmatized, ostracized, and so it helps that we show solidarity and affirm them. I'm looking at this report and all the contents and the information that is here. You know, it's a treasure trove of information on what has been happening in this country in regard to corruption. How can we share it with those young people, you know, our people on X, TikTok, and all those other platforms, so that they can be able to speak to some of these issues that have been highlighted in the report and just enhance the advocacy that they have really done so well this year. There was a question around I can't remember whether it was a lady, you asked something about it, but I wanted to reply to it looking at the issues around behavior change. Yeah, in terms of what can we do more. I think we now need to really push for this issue called behavior change in regard to how people react to issues around corruption. And I'll link this to what Suba Churchill has highlighted in regard to that tweet on the ESCC handle about what youth say or what they think about corruption and their engagement in it. I think we really need to push this aspect of behavior change and move from awareness and attitude to action. Let people start acting on corruption. And this is where I keep on telling government, this is where the focus should be. Sometimes when we think about enforcement, that should maybe only constitute 10% of our effort. 90% or more should be on preventing corruption. Part of preventing corruption is learning and relearning on values, ethics, and integrity. And the youth in Kenya seem to be ready for this, looking at what happened in the country 3 months ago, and now that they have seemed to take leadership on issues around accountability. How can we work with them even more to ensure that there's a greater constituency of young people who are standing for the right thing? And this goes to the comments around what can we do with the rural population. I always say, let's not leave them behind. And these are things that we need to replicate. But as Gladwell said, we are sometimes overwhelmed as small institutions, very small institutions. You see us here, sometimes it's just big names. I keep on joking. People call me international. I put an international apple. I'm as local as they come. So we also struggle with resources. We are not able to do what we need to do, ideally, but we try through partnership, and we will continue to partner.
Now, the last speaker raised the most important issue that we need to deal with, and that is the issue of the partnership between the religious organizations, the youth, and CSOs. And what is required is for us to get technical support from the CSOs, specifically the CSOs that are here in charge of this conference. They provide us with the advocacy material that is required. Then we go and target specific counties and constituencies, and we hold specific leaders to account. The general approach doesn't work. So I go back to the proposal that we target the MPs because they have failed in the oversight. And we do a recall. We collect the number of signatures which are required. 2, we target them at the CDF committees. Before CDF is made more constitutional, we have enough material to go after the CDF committees. And they are corrupt because they are encouraged to do so by the MP and they're in partnership with the MP. And thirdly, we go after the MP specifically himself or herself. We do a lifestyle audit. It is very easy. We know the assets that they have acquired in the last 2 years. And EACC is willing to work with us. We petitioned EACC to carry out lifestyle audit, and any asset that the MP cannot explain is forfeited to government. That is the law. And then we start the process of organizing communities under an umbrella at the county, and we are benefiting from the work that has been done by USAID. They have organized 11 counties, the umbrellas at the county level. So we deepen that organization down to the ward, using the model we have tested very, very well and very successfully here in Kilereshwa and in one rural ward of Dendero in Kiambu County. It works. And we then finally partner with the church, because the church is the one that has the reach. And therefore, the challenge that you would be giving us is to now move from the discussion that we've had in today's meeting and the report that we have launched into piloting specific action in a few counties. And you will be amazed at what we can get by way of results. Thank you.
We've now come to the end of the day, and it is now time for us to launch the report. So I'm going to ask you, Tijan, to beam it up, and the report will be handed out, Tijan, right? We can start handing it out to the participants. You heard today from the author of the report, and obviously it's also a team effort, but as Sheila says, we're actually struggling with very few resources. So you have to imagine that some of us have been burning the midnight oil for a long time in order to get this work done. So civil society, as Sheila was saying, often looks very big. You see words like international. We're punching way above our weight. And so obviously with more resources we could do a lot more, but we're still very proud of what we've managed to do here. You will get the hard copy in your hands. Fred, Lucy, thank you, here they come. And I felt it important to also give you the link to the online report, which will be on our website at www.africog.org. And the important thing about the online report is it contains appendices which are not in the written report, because that would have made it much too expensive to produce. So when you go online, you'll see a timeline of events during the from the advent of William Ruto to power. We tried to bring it as close to the present day as possible. I think we came up to last week or this, in fact. So we have a timeline. We have a table of significant cases of prosecution which were dropped, and the reasons stated and what the people were being prosecuted for, including murder, rape, and other such activities which you would think would a priori disqualify anybody for public office if there were significant reason to believe that there's reason to bring charges against them for such actions. We also have a table showing how government has stuffed its wage bill, the personnel emoluments. We heard about the Office of the President, I think it was, who had almost 500 ghost workers and others. So those are all at the end of the report for your reference. They won't be in the hard copy. You'll find them online. And also we have some information on Kenya's status in terms of its how effectively it's viewed as trying to combat money laundering. As you know, when you get billions and billions of shillings of corrupt money, you have to find a way to wash it clean so that you can insert it back into the legitimate economy. Some of our prominent politicians, as Mwalimu was telling us, have been caught carrying sacks of cash to foreign destinations, which is actually almost comical in its ineptitude. But there you are. Corruption corrupts, and it also makes people quite foolish sometimes. There's no incentive to improve. There's no incentive for excellence. So we're very happy to have done this. After this, we're going to do a photo ops. I don't think you need to be there for that, but we'll do photo ops with the report. And you've seen, keep going to the end stage, but that's okay. As long as you have you go onto the AfriCOG website, you will find the online report there, okay? So I want to thank you all very much. Thank you to Sheila Masinde, Sam Waura. Thanks above all to Mwalimu. Thanks to the team, Tijan, Eric, Fred, Lucy, Urbanos. I may be forgetting your colleagues, Eric, who have also been helping. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Ufungamano Center, Ufungamano House, for hosting us. And they're also going to serve us lunch. So for that, we thank them. You've been here for a long time. I'm sure many of you are quite hungry. So having thanked that, and also thanks to our funders. One wonders whether to name them because we don't want them to be targeted by the government, and we've also had visits from the gentlemen who like to drive around in Subarus. So thanks to all our funders and supporters and all the many people who make our work possible. Okay, so thank you everyone for your participation. Thanks. We'll do the photo op down, I think, no? Thank you. Please inform us, do people need to collect a lunch token? Yes? Okay, so you collect from Nancy, I think? So thank you so much, Nancy and Lucy. They will give you tokens for lunch, and you're free to disperse unless you want to watch us being photographed. And since there are quite a lot of you, it's good if some of you make your way already so you can be being served, so the line doesn't take too long to go through, yeah? Thank you so much.